The mixer overview in Cubase in the window. If you hit F3 on your keyboard, it'll open the first mixing board. There are different ways to expand the mixing board so you can see more parameters for each channel. If you look over here in the corner here on the side, you can actually expand the mixing board. This will show different parts of the mixing board. Collapsing these will help you save some real estate on your screen. This first little area shows the different inputs and outputs of the channel. You'll look over here on every channel on the mixing board. You'll look over here and you'll see the inputs. We're going to look at setting up the different inputs in a tutorial called VST connections. But this will select the input to the channel. If you're recording from your sound card, recording onto this, you'll want to have the input from your sound card. And if you're going out, it'll need eventually to make it to the sound card. These channels can go directly to the sound card and out through your master fader, or they can go through group channels, which we'll look at later on. Group channels are really neat. We could take all of the drums, create a group channel, and send all of the drums out through the group channel, and then we can control the volume and things like compression and EQing for the drums as a group. We're going to look at that in a tutorial called group channels. This right here is telling you that these are mono channels, so you'll only be able to select an input from a mono, left or right. If these are stereo channels, you'll see the option of selecting the stereo channel. This one right here has to do with phasing. We'll look at that in a different tutorial called phasing. After we look at an overview of the mixing board, we'll look at each one of these more in depth. This right here is really neat. It's actually the input to the channel. A lot of people don't think about this one, but people who use mixing boards do. It's possible that you may be overdriving the input of the channel, which means you're overdriving the input to your effects and compressors, which we'll look at in a different tutorial. And turning this up or down, since this is last in the channel, won't stop the input from overdriving. So over here you can actually turn down and up the input of the channel, which will stop it from overdriving. We'll look at this one too more in depth when we look at the mixing board in depth. To be able to adjust this, you have to hold the shift key down and drag your mouse up or down. Look at this more in depth when we get into the mixing tutorials on when we need to, how we can tell if we're overdriving our channels. Back to the overview. This part right here shows this area of the mixing board, which can be several different things. If you look over here, you see a bunch of different buttons, and these buttons are global view for the mixing board. So if I hit on this button up here, all of the channels on the mixing boards are showing the inserts. If you haven't watched the tutorials on the inspector panel, please do that. It'll show you the inserts and all these other different settings here more in depth. The next one we're looking at is show all equalizers. This is the parametric view of equalizer, which we showed you in the inspector panel tutorials. The next one will be actually another view of the parametric. Keep in mind that these are the same EQ, they're just different views of the same one. So if I make any changes on this view of the EQ, it's also going to show the change over here. It's just the same EQ with a different view, so you can use whichever one you're more comfortable with. These here are called parametrics, and we'll look at those in a chapter on EQing. This is also a parametric, and when you look down here, it's actually called a paragraphic. The reason it's called a paragraphic is because it works like a parametric, but it gives you this little view up here which lets you see the EQing you're doing. I happen to be adding some treble here, and on this one I happen to be adding some mid-range. This view here is called a paragraphic EQ because we can see the shape of the EQ. Moving on down the global settings on the channel, you'll see here these are your effect sends, and like I said, we discussed these in the inspector panel tutorials, and we're going to discuss these in length on the using effects channels. So this is your sends where you can send, usually you'll put things on here like reverb and echo, things you want to add to your vocal or guitar or whatever it is. To open these panels here, remember anytime you see an italic E in Cubase, it opens the edit window. Since these are my effect sends, and you can see right here, this is my room reverb. This will open the room reverb so I can make adjustments to it. I'm using the same room reverb on this channel. They're both sending to the same reverb, but we can send more or less on each channel. And so when I click the edit window on either of these, it's actually opening the same reverb. See how I changed that? And then when I come over to here, you'll see it's still got the change. Because one of the advantages of using effect sends is that you can take one reverb and send or add more or less of each channel on it. You could put a lot of the same reverb on your guitar and less on your vocal, stuff like that.